Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Alexandra Campbell. I'm the executive director of the Reston Museum. If you've never been to the museum, we're right on the other side of the plaza. We are free to visit, so please come and visit us. And a part of our mission is to preserve and share Reston's unique history through programs such as this one tonight. So we have a really wonderful program for you. Thank you so much for coming out. There's some light refreshments over at the table if you haven't gotten any already. And then we also have some special pins for this program as well. You can pick up on that table. It says, "I'm not dead, I'm just Reston." So feel free to pick up a pen before you leave. I'm very happy to introduce our presenter tonight. Her name is Ava Smigliani, and she is a recent graduate of George Mason University. She has a BA in history, and she has been with the museum for several months now and has done some wonderful research and put a wonderful presentation together for you tonight. So please enjoy, and I'll turn it over to Ava.
Hey, thank you so much for coming. Happy Friday the 13th and happy early Halloween. We're going to be diving into sort of some spooky myths, monsters, urban legends centered around Reston. Let's see if this is going to work. Yay. Okay. So there's a few different things that we're going to cover. We're going to talk about specifically graveyards in Reston, why there are so few. We're also going to talk about sort of this little Easter egg by the town center, which are these little bridge trolls. And I think what people are mostly interested in, we're going to talk about the Green Forest Club, also known as the Green Forest Nudist Colony in pre-Reston. And then we're going to talk about Bunnyman and sort of how that ties into each other. I also want to point out this little witch picture right here I found in one of the Reston magazines from, I think that one's 1975. I just thought it was really cute. Before we start, I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer, sort of some warnings as well. I'm going to be talking about one actual murder that took place in Reston. I just want to off the bat say I'm not trying to sensationalize the murder itself. I more want to talk about how it impacted local folklore. I've also had some people, some patrons in the museum want me to go into the murder of Gwen Ames, which I don't know if people are familiar with that. I'm sure those who've lived in Reston for a while are. You know, I've had some people say, I've heard this and this about it. And I just want to give a bit of a disclaimer that her family have posted and they're still sort of looking for answers. This murder was 50 years ago. And again, since I have heard some rumors just from talking to patrons, if anyone knows anything, the Fairfax County cold case line has been looking for information on it. Their email is just Fairfax County Police cold cases at fairfaxcounty.gov. So if you hear any rumors, don't talk to the museum, just let the police know. All right. So something a little more fun. Why can't I be buried in Reston? As a lot of people are getting older, especially those who have been in Reston since the beginning, I've had some people wonder, why were there no graveyards in Reston, especially considering it was a planned community where so many different things were carefully thought out. So we're going to talk about that. So on the part of Robert E. Simon, this was initially intentional. I'm just going to read his quote. This is from In His Own Words, which we do have for sale in the Reston Museum. So the planners wanted to have a cemetery. It was put in the plan, but I nixed it. It was at the edge of Reston near Lake Fairfax Park. I was horrified by the whole funerary industry, especially the salesmanship of caskets. That I found quite sickening. I wasn't too sharp. I should have found a way to deal with it without feeling tainted by the business. It was a mistake I made, and there are people who are still angry with me for this. So I guess, as a lot of us know, Robert E. Simon Jr. did start developing Reston right after the death of his father. Specifically, after the death of his father, he inherited his business and his wealth and then started building Reston. I guess in the wake of that, when he was making all of these plans, a graveyard was not necessarily something that he wanted to consider, just because that was so fresh, I think, as we can see. Yeah. So that doesn't mean that there aren't any cemeteries or graveyards in Reston, as the land that Reston now sits on did exist, of course, pre-Reston. So this is the cemetery surveys map from the Fairfax County GIS department. This is missing a few other cemeteries that have been recently discovered. There are 2 more, I believe, than there are on this map, but this does show some. So if you're wondering why you might see a few cemeteries, but you can't get buried in one, or you might be able to, I haven't contacted the churches themselves to know. That is why. So there are a few. All right. Next, we're going to be talking about something I think a little bit less serious, which is a little sort of a Reston Easter egg that not a lot of people know about, that I just thought was pretty fun. What is hiding under this bridge? Thanks to Public Arts Reston, there are dozens of works of public arts all around Reston. Besides through Public Arts Reston has always attracted artists with sort of its unique architecture, and it was initially in the beginning, Robert E. Simon was trying to encourage artists, specifically in clusters like Hickory Cluster, which is right over there, sort of unique design, modern design, trying to bring in certain types of people. Oh my gosh, where was I? Specifically right here on the plaza, there's also, we have the art gallery, and surrounded by us in this room right here, there's plenty of different works of art. So many of the better known artworks are around the town center. I'm sure many of you have seen the beautiful sculptures, the beautiful murals, all that. There are a few hidden pieces of art, as we're going to get into right here. So this bridge is located just north of Oak Park, which is right by the Reston Town Center. And this bridge actually doesn't really lead to anywhere, which I thought was pretty funny. The gate is closed. It's quite hard to get underneath it, but if you can manage to, you're going to see these 2. Where are we? So according to the Public Arts Reston, these are made by an artist named Mary Lou LaRue Wells, who she does not live in Reston anymore, but she did quite a number of different projects with Public Arts Reston. So these are actually representations, sort of caricatures of 2 different figures that are pretty important to Fairfax County history. So the one on that side, as you can see, is Walter Webdale, who's the former chairman of the Fairfax County Housing Authority, and he was also the one who commissioned these works, and I think he just thought it would be funny to include his face in it. He was incredibly influential through both Fairfax and the Arlington Housing Authorities, although he unfortunately died, I believe, last year. But he is immortalized here in troll form. Right, and the other one is Jack Harity, who was the former chairman of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors for a number of years. He was the chairman specifically when Fairfax County was beginning to develop rapidly economically, and he was definitely a major part of that as the chairman, naturally. These are actually quite difficult to get to if you want to see them. There's not really a trail or anything. You kind of have to bushwhack through underneath, but if you can get to them, they're very neat.
How big are they?
How big are they? They're pretty good size.
They're the same artist?
They are the same artist, yeah. They're both Mary LaRue Wells.
Okay. Is there a plaque? How do you know?
There's no plaque, actually. You kind of just have to know, or it's on the Fairfax County, not Fairfax County, it's on the Public Arts Reston website, which is honestly the only way to know anything about them. All right. Next, this is a fun one. Let me see if I can. Oh my gosh. Yeah. All right, next we're going to be going into the Green Forest Nudist Colony, which existed pre-Reston. Both of these pictures are from the Virginia room of the Fairfax County Library, which is a great place for all of these, information on all of these. They actually have a folder on the colony if you're interested and want more detail. I'm sort of just going to give a quick bit of an overview. So these two images, I don't know exactly the year they were taken. They were unlabeled. I don't know who took them either, but this would have been probably late 70s-ish, as the site has been now built on top of, which we'll get into. So the Green Forest Nudist Club, or the Green Forest Club, or the Green Forest Colony, went by a couple different names. We know that it was established in 1933. There's newspaper articles that reference it, essentially. We know it disbanded around the 50s. I think the last mention is in 1949, but that doesn't necessarily mean it didn't exist farther. And it was also on Lawyers Road. We also know a little bit about their doctrine. Sort of, it's pretty standard nudist colony rhetoric. It's sort of about freedom and about being one with nature, as at the time this area was heavily wooded, which I'll show in the next slide. So, oh, that's not the right side. So this is actually some articles, newspaper articles that reference the colony. I thought some of these were pretty interesting because they're mostly about people's complaints. People were trying very, very hard to not get this colony built. These are two of very, very many newspaper articles I found where the Board of Supervisors was trying to ban it. The governor actually tried to get in on it briefly. The Fairfax County Chief of Police also mentioned that he wanted to ban it before it was built. I also thought it was fun that Smith Bowman mentioned that he didn't want it built either. You know, he was a pretty prominent figure. However, they weren't breaking any laws, so the colony was built anyways. All right, so this is the site of it. So right here is Lawyer Road. It's not quite labeled, but it is right there. So this is the 1937 GIS map. This is available on the Fairfax County website. Based on police reports, etc., I'm solid 90% sure this is the site of the colony. And from talking to other people, I can't quite be 100% sure, as you know, it's a little bit broad. I do have the deed to the property. But a lot of the markers don't exist anymore, so it's a bit hard for me to check and reference them, but we're fairly certain. And I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit because there's one building on the property, which we'll show in closer detail because it's really hard to see it. And I circled it in red conveniently so we can see it. So there's one building. And then this is it now. This is in 2022. So I just thought that was particularly interesting. I did send an email to the church. I asked if they wanted to talk to me about acquiring the land, if they found anything while they were building, and for some reason no one got back to me. Not quite sure why. I thought it was very nice about it. Oh. So this colony is perhaps best known for something, sorry to give you all whiplash, a little more serious, which is the murder of June and Frances Holliver, I believe is how her name is pronounced. So this is June. I'm not quite sure when this picture was taken. I found it on a website that was listing her grave and some information about her. She was 37 years old when she was killed, and then we'll just get right into some of the details. So what exactly happened here? So she was married to Charles Holliver, I believe is how his name is pronounced, and they had between 8 and 9 month old daughter named June. Upon discovering that they had a bit of a strained marriage, it's been briefly mentioned, I believe in some of the police reports, I think it was sort of a marriage of we have to get married because you have a child kind of situation. But upon finding out she was pregnant with their second child, Charles brought the two of them into the woods where he shot her and buried them. I'm not going to get into too much detail. I don't really want to sensationalize the murder too much. Yeah, so this is a newspaper article that has a picture of Charles on it right after he was extradited, which I'll also get into. And then that is a picture of the police officers at the scene. So essentially, initially, oh my gosh, I can't talk today. So Charles was initially in, I believe, 1950 was when his trial was, and he was sentenced to death by the electric chair. And this was the first documented murder in Fairfax County, and it was definitely a bit of a shocking one, given that it did involve a child. And people also found, I'll just show some of these. So the public opinion of the trial was kind of what was particularly interesting. I read through a lot of the different court transcripts because this is all publicly available information. This murder was planned, was premeditated, and it was clearly very intentional. When confronted about it, Charles admitted it, admitted his reasonings for it, and initially he was sentenced to death by the electric chair. His lawyer said that it wouldn't be worth it to pursue an insanity charge, as he was very well aware of what he was doing. He planned things, and looking through the court transcripts, it seemed as though he was very calm about it, as though he knew what he was doing and was very intentional about it. However, this didn't really sway public opinion, as there was a quote from one police officer where he said that he described it calmly, and this sort of got a bit twisted to kind of mentions of him being this cold, callous, well, he was cold and callous and calculated, but sort of this almost inhuman figure of someone who was, committing these murders and was like sort of evil, which, I mean, he was, but he was definitely a human who knew what he was doing. So there, initially at his trial, 3 different psychologists said that he was fully sane. And I believe there was one at his second trial that said that he wasn't. And although I can't say for sure, it did seem as though the media presentation of this case and the sensationalization of it may have contributed to his charge eventually being an insanity charge, and he was instead sent to a mental institution where he stayed until 1968.
And they released him?
Yes, and then he was released, and then he lived the rest of his life in West Virginia when he died of natural causes in 2002. Yeah. Oh, not quite. So, oh my goodness, where was I? So from some conversations I've had with in the museum, with patrons, with people who have been around for a while, whenever I try to talk about the site of the murder, when I would describe it, people would say, oh, that's where I used to hear Bunnyman used to hang out, which I thought was particularly interesting, as for a long time, nothing was built on this site until the St. John Newman Church was, despite like an incredible amount of development happening around it. It almost was as though, since this was so shocking to the county, it almost seemed like it definitely held an air of reverence. And when, as I'll get into, when stories of Bunnyman sort of started to spread, I think people sort of associated it with this like foreboding kind of emotion that even long after anyone who was alive during, not alive, but anyone who would really remember this murder, it sort of held some of that weight. And then I'm sorry to give you all whiplash again, but next we're going to be talking about Bunnyman, and it definitely does it definitely does relate, as a lot of, although there's a lot of different versions of the story, a lot of them do reference, a lot of the details do line up with some of them in the Francis and June's murder. So this image is, I could not find the artist's name, but it is, I just think it's a nice piece of artwork. And this is the overpass, which is affectionately named Bunnyman Bridge. So I think pretty much everyone who's grown up in the area knows and has an understanding of Bunnyman, but I'll sort of just give a brief little overview. Although there's so many different versions of this story that really vary depending on where in Northern Virginia you are. The main story, Spark noted, usually involves a man who is escaped from some kind of prison or mental institution, usually based in Clifton. It involves sometimes a bus crash on this overpass, an individual wearing a bunny mask with a hatchet, murdering sometimes, usually children, which is interesting, or young couples. The story definitely does vary. I've heard so many different versions of it. And as I'm not sure those of you who are familiar with Brian Conley at the Virginia Room, he did a full expose on this called Bunny Man Unmasked, where he actually looks at the Maryland Maryland State University, one of the Maryland universities has the folklore archive where they interviewed a lot of different people about local Maryland, Northern Virginia folklore. And in that, they found 53 different variations of this story, most of them involving an individual with an axe, the murdering of children, and the overpass. So there's a lot of different versions of the story, but there was actually some, real history and real events that led to it. Stories like that don't folklore doesn't just appear overnight. It is kind of the culmination of several different things. So this starts in 1970, in October of 1970, where an individual with, I'm just going to read some of it. I feel like I could summarize it, but it's quite interesting in and of itself. So the one man in bunny suit sought in Fairfax is the first reference I can find. Air Force Academy cadet Robert Bennett told police that shortly after midnight last Sunday, he and his fiancee were sitting in a car in the block of Guinea Road when a man dressed in a white suit with long bunny ears ran from nearby bushes and shouted, "You're on private property and I have your tag number." The then rabbit threw a wooden-handled hatchet through the right front car window. And then they couldn't find anything about him. There's also police reports of this, so this could be made up, although it seems definitely like a weird thing to make up. And also, there was a hole in their front window that looked like it came from a hatchet. So, and then again, he's seen. This article, I just love this one. Fairfax County's bunny man, or an animal of the same breed, has been sighted in Prince George's County. So this one's less. So they accused the occupants of a car of, that's the same story. The mother of two said that she saw them on the street and that he sort of left. So that is the third one. The second one I put on its own slide because I thought it was really funny. This happened in between the two. This was in the October 31st. This was published on Halloween, but probably happened, a day or two before. I'm just gonna read it. Thursday night's rabbit, wearing a suit described as gray, black, and white, was spotted a block away at 5307 Guinea Road. Started shopping. "All you people trespass around here," Philip said the rabbit told him as he whacked 8 gashes into the pole. "If you don't get out of here, I'm going to bust you on the head." So that was particularly interesting. And there, obviously, this kind of a story, oh my goodness, where did it go? Obviously, this kind of a story would quickly become sensationalized, although these are the 3 that are pretty heavily documented in newspapers besides just, I use the Washington Post and the Fairfax Herald, but I was looking at other newspaper archives, and this is sort of mentioned around this time. There are only about 3 cases that we think are probably real, and then it sort of just snowballs from there. All right, so I think I touched on it a little bit, but sort of what exactly does this have to do with Reston and why is it relevant? Well, though we already mentioned that when I talked to, although informally, so I don't have a source for this, when I was having some discussions with patrons in the museum about where did their legends tell them that Bunny Man came from? A lot of the older folks would describe to me the site of where St. John Newman's Church is now, or where the nudist colony was. And although a lot of these individuals didn't remember the murders that took place there, or they didn't know they took place there, they were familiar with the murders. It does seem like that site really did hold an amount of reverence, which is particularly interesting and also not necessarily surprising. And I also think that Brian Conley in the, oh my goodness, in his Bunny Man Unmasked also talks about this a little bit. It seems as though at this time when, you know, Bunny Man is showing up, there is such rapid development happening in Fairfax County. You know, Reston is finally beginning, and we have, yes, 1970, it's starting to begin. And the area around DC is growing exponentially. And it's clear that some people didn't quite like that, as, you know, he's axing developments and telling people that this property is private. It seems as though there is this sort of tension between development and Fairfax County that I've seen through our oral history archives, through conversations with people who have been in, particularly Reston since the start, with people who've been in Fairfax County before it has sort of become this, you know, well-populated, well-known area back to when it was just farmland. There is definitely, even with people who lived in Reston at the start, it seems as though development is viewed as a negative thing because it, how do I describe this? I've been told that it's sort of, oh my gosh, I can't remember this. It diminishes some of the community aspect that, you know, people felt Reston was known for in the early days. And also people felt that way about Fairfax County once it started developing. So it feels as though in a lot of ways, and in the ways that Bunny Man sort of snowballed, it almost, I don't want to say it represents this, but it sort of showcases how, you know, development impacted people, the way that they viewed the world, the way that they interpreted things, the way real situations were viewed in their head. Yeah. Yes.
So Reston is often a Bunny Man.
You could say that, yeah. I mean, pretty quickly, Northern Virginia went from sort of just farmland where, you know, someone could have a nudist colony in 80 acres in the middle of the woods. It was 80 acres. I don't know if I mentioned that. To, I mean, we know how hard it is to get like a half an acre now. I think in the 70s, particularly, that is when the most housing is built. You know, it's when the most businesses are being built, and it's happening incredibly quickly. Yeah, I don't know. I just want to give some special thanks and just some materials that I did reference throughout this, sort of to give me things to look at. Brian Conley, former historian of Fairfax County in the Virginia Room. His work on Bunny Man Unmasked is particularly interesting. So if you'd like to read more, I would definitely recommend that. And he also helped with the cemetery database in the Virginia Room as well. The librarians there are super helpful and wonderful, and they have a folder on the Green Forest Colony for anyone who's interested. It's the culmination of a lot of different researchers. A lot of it is, there's no names in there. It's just sort of what people have gathered. Wicked Fairfax County by Cindy Bennett is a wonderful book that talks about some of the early-ish history of Fairfax County. And it was a good place to sort of start with. The Reston Remember When Facebook page, I had asked if anyone had any information. And I had a few people who sort of corroborated essentially where I thought the nudist colony was, but I couldn't be 100% sure. So I had a few different people message me and say that they thought it was at the site of St. John Newman Church. So that sort of solidified it in my eyes. Also Public Arts Reston, kind of goes obvious. Patrons of the Reston Museum who talked to me, sort of like had informal conversations where I could sort of get a feel. I also want to thank Alex and my friend Christian for taking pictures of the troll under the bridge, so I didn't have to climb under there. Yeah, if anyone has any questions? Yes.
Yeah, the Bunny Man was from long ago, so you would like to find out if it exists.
Yeah, if he did exist, he would probably be dead.
Well, you said he was possibly in his 2070s, so he could be still alive, right?
He could still be alive. He could still be alive. It has been quite a long time, but I don't think I don't think he's still around and kicking. I'm not too concerned. You know, the bunny man as a concept is not still alive. Yes.
You mentioned Gwen Ames briefly. Do
Yes.
you know any of the story of that?
I do know the story. I think just because I was looking around and like I found the family on Facebook and they kind of were talking against the sensationalization of her murder. So I just didn't really want to get into it too much, just out of respect. Yeah.
The older part of the nudist colony, or was it just that he went there to?
I've actually gotten some conflicting information on that. I believe he was part of the colony. I've had some newspapers that said he would. I think in one case he said he was, and then another case he said he wasn't. I feel like since he knew what it was, he very likely was, but I can't guarantee it, unfortunately. Yes.
So you talked to like people in the area, have you heard any like ghost stories, like haunted areas or buildings?
I've had some people tell me that they think the Bowman Distillery building is haunted. People have told me to look into it, and I looked as into it as I could, and I could not find anyone mentioning like any kind of a ghost sighting, even informally. So maybe. Yes.
How about the golf course, like that area, the WOP trail? Do you think,
Yeah.
you know, any, you know, I know because they used to be like old, you know, railroad, station back
Yes.
in the Civil War area. So
Yeah.
some Union soldiers and
Yeah.
veterans used to be around that area.
Yeah. Although Union soldiers, yeah, it was Union soldiers who traveled through there, through the WO&D near